Melissa Mooney was single for the first time in her adult life.
A promising new beginning.
I screamed and told him to stop, to get out, to please stop. And then he started choking me, and I was gasping for air.
What did they believe the killer's motive was?
They learned that he was in the Army, and wherever he went, he left a trail of terror in his way.
Sadly, there were accusers sprinkled all over the United States.
Catching a killer before he strikes again. Hi, I'm Nancy O'Dell. Today's crime expose brings us to the Wilmington suburb of Castle Hayne, North Carolina. The rural bedroom community, known for its quiet and laid-back pace of life, became the unlikely setting for a young mother's murder in her own home. With few clues to work with, local investigators and the FBI joined forces to find her elusive killer, who had left a trail of violence in his wake. It was a muggy Friday morning in Wilmington, North Carolina, and 28-year-old Melissa Mooney was late for work.
Melissa was never late to work. She had a habit and reputation of always being the first one at the office. Her absence was noticed immediately.
As the office manager for the FBI field office, she ran a tight ship, but colleagues knew she was in the process of moving into a new home.
When a half an hour ticked by, it was out of character. When an hour was passed, it was now full-on panic. And by 2 hours, they had sent out agents to her old apartment and to her new home to do a safety check to make sure that she was okay.
When the two agents arrived at the house, they immediately sensed something was terribly wrong. Their concern grew when they saw Melissa's front door.
There was a footprint right there in the center of it, and it had been knocked off its hinges.
Worried about his colleagues' well-being, one of the agents immediately entered the home.
He wasn't sure at that point whether Sammy, Melissa's young daughter, was inside, so he walked through the house calling out the names Sammy and Melissa. Did not see anybody initially.
As the agent walked through the home, he noticed disturbing evidence in the living room.
We saw signs of a struggle in that living room. The phone had been forcibly removed from the wall. You could see signs of a life interrupted. She had been watching a movie that night. There was a popcorn bowl and a soda can, which later tested positive for her DNA.
So this was not like a date interrupted. She was alone. At some point, there was an intruder.
A trail of muddy boot prints, similar to the one left on Melissa's front door, led to a bedroom where the agent made a grim discovery.
Melissa was found in the back bedroom of her own home, located between the bed and the wall. She was nude, and the bedding was also removed from the mattress, and so there's a bare mattress in that room as well.
Sheriff's deputies arrived minutes later and carefully began to process the scene.
Observing Melissa Mooney's body at the crime scene, we were able to determine that she was likely killed the night before or in the early morning hours prior to the discovery of her body. So we knew this was a fresh crime scene, but we weren't able to drill down and figure out precisely the time of death.
Was anything stolen from the home?
No, nothing was stolen from the home, and that was an important clue to investigators early on because sometimes we're able to figure out the motive by process of elimination.
What did they believe the killer's motive was?
Our belief is that Melissa Mooney was targeted because she was a woman and that she was sexually assaulted during the time of her killing. I say that because her body was found nude and in a back bedroom area, and the sheets had been removed from her bed. We believe the killer took those following the assault.
Investigators began to collect evidence for testing.
They actually cut the top of that mattress off to see if they could find hair or semen or any type of biological evidence that might indicate the identity of the perpetrator.
The act of breaking in the front door gave investigators a sense of the killer's brazenness.
We knew from the footprint, although we didn't have the exact size, we knew that we were dealing with a male who was larger in stature.
They also theorized the perpetrator was an experienced criminal.
There was this baby blanket which had been placed upon the stove, and it had burn marks on it, but it didn't ignite because I guess it had fire retardant material inside. But we knew at that point that we were dealing with someone who was very evidence conscious, who had the presence of mind, even during a horrific assault, to try to cover his tracks and burn down the crime scene.
They had also taken measures to stop Melissa from calling for help.
A phone line had been pulled out of the wall to disable Melissa's ability, obviously, to call out for help.
A canvass of Melissa's new neighborhood yielded no clues.
Melissa had moved in the night before, and while there are hundreds of homes in the Apple Valley subdivision now, at that time, Melissa was moving into the model home, and she was a pioneer in that neighborhood. There were only a few other homes there.
And so the neighbors didn't really know each other yet and didn't understand each other's patterns.
The few neighbors who lived there did not report anything unusual.
They said that they didn't know her, that they didn't see anything or hear anything go bump in the night, and they were shocked.
Melissa's friends and family were also shocked by her tragic and untimely death, which left her young daughter motherless.
Turned out Sammy, the 4-year-old, was an hour and a half up the road in Hubert, North Carolina, where her dad was a Marine at Camp Lejeune.
As investigators learned more about the young mother, they questioned the proximity of the timing between her move and her murder.
Melissa Mooney was single for the first time in her adult life. She'd just gone through a difficult and painful breakup with her husband, Roger Mooney, and she was in the process of exploring becoming an adult and dating.
The reason that she had left her husband a year earlier was they were getting a divorce after some reported domestic violence that her employer, the FBI, first questioned her about. They assisted her in getting temporary housing, and when that lease was up, she was now moving into a new home that was going to be all hers.
Investigators were hoping Melissa's ex-husband could answer questions they had about her shocking murder on the same day she had tried creating a new life for herself. Autopsy results proved the young mother had suffered a violent death.
For the autopsy left little doubt that Melissa had been strangled both with a ligature and manually.
They suspected that that same phone cord that was pulled out of the wall was actually used to strangle her.
Her last moments were terrifying to imagine.
She was completely overpowered by her attacker. We found that her nose had bruise patterns on both sides of it, indicative of somebody who had been pinching her nose during the assault.
While there was no forensic or physical evidence proving Melissa had been sexually assaulted, investigators still believed the murder had been sexually motivated.
In a low-risk situation where a woman is killed in the sanctity of her own home, it almost always is an intimate partner case. And so where we started was actually with Roger Mooney, because he fit the profile.
Roger being her ex-husband, how did friends describe her relationship with him?
Toxic. Melissa Mooney and Roger had a bad breakup. This was not a peaceful parting of ways.
Melissa had expressed to coworkers she was scared of him.
Melissa showed up to work with a black eye a year earlier. It was her coworkers. They said, if you want to get out, we're going to help you. And that's exactly what she did.
Even after the divorce, the relationship remained less than civil.
Roger, at that time in his life, was a gunny sergeant at Camp Lejeune in Jacksonville, North Carolina. In fact, in the weeks leading up to this incident, he was using Melissa's picture for target practice and telling people that he shot better when her face was on the gun.
Evidence also seemed to point towards Roger.
The semen that was found on the mattress actually came back to Roger Mooney. But what you have to know about that type of evidence is that there's no timestamp on it, and it can still be around a year later.
Roger Mooney was questioned at length by investigators and appeared horrified by his ex-wife's murder.
He took a polygraph exam and failed. He took another one and failed. He took a third one and it was inconclusive. Sometimes when they hear that they're lying, they confess. Roger did not confess, and in fact said, I am nervous to be here. We are talking about a woman I love. This is very emotional for me. But nonetheless, that was yet another red flag for us.
So what was Roger's alibi on the night that Melissa was murdered?
Not a good one. Roger was taking care of their child, Sammy, that evening, and we had him on videotape earlier that night, walking into a store and purchasing some food for dinner, but he was alone at the house with Sammy, and after she went to bed, there would have been ample opportunity for him to have gotten in the car and driven to Wilmington.
While there were many things pointing at Roger Mooney, There were also several pointing away from him.
Tire impressions from his truck, which did not match the tire impressions that we had at the Sandy Field. The boot prints did not match his boots. And so everything we tried to do to include him as a suspect kept excluding him.
So did detectives ever find anything connecting Roger to Melissa's murder?
No, there was nothing that directly connected Roger to this incident.
At the 2-year anniversary of Melissa's death, investigators offered a generous reward.
The leads dried up, and they all said, we're giving an $80,000 reward out for any information. We're going to start over. And what they did is they brought in 80 agents from around the country to do canvassing and to look at this from every which way.
Melissa Mooney's murder case had reached a standstill when investigators decided to revisit the case file and interview everyone they had spoken to in the early days of the investigation.
Part of the renewed investigation involved bringing in FBI agents from outside of this jurisdiction to look at things with a fresh set of eyes. And one of the things that they did is these agents from other places began, among other things, doing a neighborhood canvass.
That canvass included Tyrone Delgado, who used to live across the street from Melissa at the time of her murder.
He had called in sick to work that day. He was out in his yard watering the grass and sort of watching investigators as they were watching him.
Delgado and his wife Anna had been cooperative with detectives. So you're going to talk to Tyrone Delgado again. What was his response this time?
He was embracing conspiracy theories. He said that she was likely killed by someone in law enforcement. He refused to provide his social security number when asked who he was, and he was otherwise uncooperative.
His cagey behavior piqued the curiosity of the investigators.
His demeanor that day caused agents to find his social security number, and they made a bombshell discovery within an hour of that interview of Tyrone Delgado.
Delgado had been a suspect in another similar crime.
They learned that in a place called Leesville, Louisiana, sometime earlier, that a woman had been violently assaulted in the sanctity of her own home by someone making forced entry into a house and sexually assaulting her.
Delgado actually pinched out the nose of the victim and covered her mouth at the same time in an effort to control her breathing.
Miraculously, the woman survived the frenzied attack. The more investigators learned about Delgado, the more they became convinced they had found Melissa Mooney's killer.
They learned that he was in the Army, and wherever he went, he left a trail of terror in his way.
Delgado had been a suspect in several sexual assault cases.
Sadly, there were accusers sprinkled all over the United States. There were some remarkable commonalities among the cases involving these other women. Notably, his motive was generally a sexual assault. He would isolate them. He would frequently rip phones out of the wall. We saw some things consistent with what happened in our crime scene with Melissa.
Investigators were stunned to learn he had never been convicted of a felony before.
When he would get in trouble with local authorities, he was usually able to either have the women dismiss the charges or plead to something very minor so that they were never able to take his DNA or other biological evidence.
Several of his victims were interviewed and shared the stuff of nightmares with detectives.
I screamed and told him to stop, to get off, to please stop. I was pregnant and I had children. And then he put his 2 fingers around my throat and then he started choking me and I was gasping for air.
We were ultimately able to interview and talk to 9 women from around the country. What these women said was haunting in its similarity. And the only common denominator in all their stories was Tyrone Delgado.
Investigators had amassed a wealth of circumstantial evidence when Delgado was arrested for a separate crime.
While this case was pending, he was involved actually in another homicide involving a young man who he was teaching karate to. And one of the young men that he had been teaching, he ended up getting in an altercation with and actually shot him in the back of the head.
The arrest allowed investigators to obtain a DNA sample from him and to compare it to evidence from Mooney's case.
And when we were able to finally take his DNA and compare it to a pair that was found on the bed, there was a mitochondrial match. We knew with 99.97% certainty that he was the contributor of that pair on her mattress.
And there was more.
The tipping point became when he assaulted his own wife, Anna. The defendant had recently been released from prison, and while he was away in prison, he believed that she had had an affair with another man. And upon getting out, he violently assaulted her at night in her own home, and by strangling her, among other things.
Anna told investigators that Tyrone would often leave their home and wander at night, and she provided important clues about what she witnessed in the days following Melissa's murder.
When Tyrone Delgado saw us collecting tire impressions and boot impressions from the sand that was nearby the home, he not only burned his own boots in a barrel behind his home, but he took his truck that had recently had a tire change in to get new tires put on.
Investigators had heard enough, and Tyrone Delgado was arrested and charged with Melissa Mooney's murder 6 years after her death. Delgado had his day in court 4 years after his arrest and pled not guilty.
We had a single hair, which was a partial profile of somebody consistent with Tyrone Delgado. But absent that, our proof largely rested on the circumstantial nature of this killing, the fact that he would have had the motive, means, and opportunity to carry out the case, and then the collective power and strength of these other women from Tyrone Delgado's past that came into the courtroom and shared their story.
In their closing statement, prosecutors reminded the jury how Delgado's violence had destroyed so many lives.
Delgado, he is the puppeteer. He's the one that thinks he's in charge because he's all about power and control. And what I told that jury is, even though he has written this very sad chapter in the lives of not only Melissa Mooney, but a lot of women, you now have the pen. You have the verdict sheet, which is the final page in this story.
You know, I remember when the jury came back with their verdict, Tyrone Delgado yelled at his wife, Anna, who at that point was continuing to try to control her and threatening her.
Tyrone Delgado was ultimately found guilty of first-degree murder and sentenced to life in prison without parole. After exhausting his appeals, and after the U.S. Supreme Court then declined to hear his case, Delgado remains in prison for life. And now, it's time for today's Safety Spotlight. To help maximize your safety at home, take steps to ensure it is properly secured. When possible, consider enhancing lighting in and around your home for greater awareness and visibility. Install motion-activated lights around entry points, driveways, and pathways. Use timers on your indoor lights so even when you're not home, you can create the illusion of occupancy. Ensure all windows are locked. Consider smart locks for added security, as well as reinforcing doors and window frames to prevent violent entry. You and your family's safety is of greatest importance. I'm Nancy O'Dell. For everyone here at Crime Exposé, please join us next time and stay safe.